Millionaire arrived at work like always, until he found two kids curled up on the floor. It was supposed to be a normal morning. The lights in the city were still waking up when Graham Lennox stepped out of his silver sedan, adjusting the cuffs of his pressed shirt like he did every day. He liked the silence before sunrise. It was when the world made the most sense, orderly, efficient, predictable. But what he found waiting inside his office that morning was anything but. Before we dive into this emotional journey, take a second to like this video, leave a comment if you've ever had a moment that changed your life unexpectedly, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. Now, let's begin. Graham moved through the polished marble lobby of Lennox Tech like a man in a rhythm. He swiped his keycard, nodded at the front desk that was still empty, and rode the elevator alone to the top floor. The soft hum of machines and the quiet whir of the city far below were the only sounds. He opened the door to his private office, paused. Something was off. The air felt different, warmer maybe, lived in. On the couch, a folded blanket. On the table, a half-empty water bottle that hadn't been there yesterday. And then he heard it. The softest sound breathing, slow, steady. Graham stepped around the corner of his desk, and that's when he saw them. Two children, curled up on the carpet asleep. A boy and a girl, heads resting on each other, their small bodies wrapped in what looked like a single worn blanket. One clutched a comic book. The other held nothing but a fistful of blanket and a quiet sense of fear. Graham blinked. The world for a moment forgot how to turn. She said to come here if something bad ever happened. The little girl whispered. For a few long seconds, Graham Lennox couldn't speak. He stood completely still, heart thudding in his chest, eyes fixed on the two children curled up beneath his desk. The boy had woken first, sitting upright and blinking at the morning light. His hair stuck up in tufts, and his pajama pants were frayed at the bottom. The girl followed moments later, smaller, quieter, her wide brown eyes filled with a cautious kind of bravery. Graham crouched down slowly, careful not to startle them. "You're safe," he said gently. "But how did you get in here?" The girl looked to the boy, who gave a hesitant nod like a silent permission. She took a deep breath and said, "Our mom used to work here. She said if something bad happened, we should come here. She said someone here would help." Graham blinked, a strange chill crawling up his spine. "What was your mother's name?" The girl hesitated, then softly, "Maria Ellis." And just like that, the floor felt like it shifted beneath him. Maria. He hadn't heard that name in years. A memory stirred Maria's soft laugh, echoing from the hallway the way she used to sit alone in the break room, with a cup of tea, always watching, but rarely speaking. She'd been on his customer experience team, a gentle presence, never demanding, never loud. And then one day, she was gone. No goodbye, no notice. She'd just vanished. Graham swallowed the lump rising in his throat. He looked at the kids again, really looked. They were so young. The boy's eyes were a sharp hazel, just like hers. The girl's cheeks, the curve of her chin, it was Maria. It was undeniable. "I knew your mom," he said quietly. "She was kind." The boy straightened a little. "She told us this place would be safe." "It is," Graham said, almost surprised at how sure he sounded. "It is now." They sat in silence for a moment, the early morning light creeping across the office carpet. Graham finally stood and walked to his desk, picking up the phone. He called Janine, his assistant. "Cancel everything today. Clear my schedule. And bring up some breakfast. For 3. There was a pause. 3. Just do it, please." He hung up before she could ask more questions. Turning back to the children, he said, "I'm Graham." "What are your names?" "I'm Milo," said the boy. "She's Arya." "Hi, Milo." "Hi, Arya." He offered a gentle smile. "Are you hungry?" They nodded slowly. Breakfast arrived in the form of toast, scrambled eggs, and a fruit cup. Janine knocked once and left the tray at the door without entering, sensing something private was happening. Graham placed the tray on the low coffee table and watched as the kids ate cautiously but quickly. They didn't speak much, only the clink of forks and soft chewing filled the room. After a while, Milo glanced up. "Are you going to call someone like the police?" Graham shook his head. "No, not unless you want me to." Arya looked relieved. "We didn't break anything. We just Needed somewhere warm, I understand. It was the truth, though Graham didn't understand all of it. Not yet. But something deep inside him, some quiet, heavy instinct, was already rearranging his world around these two small people. Questions would come later. For now, he simply sat with them. When they finished eating, Arya curled up on the couch, holding the comic book close, her eyelids heavy. Milo stayed awake, watching Graham with a guarded expression that was far too old for a 6-year-old. "Where's your dad?" Graham asked gently. "We don't have one," Milo said. "At least, we never met him." The words hung in the air like a fog. Graham swallowed hard. He couldn't bring himself to ask what happened to Maria. Not yet, but the silence filled in the blanks. He stood and stepped into the adjoining lounge. His hands moved on autopilot, opening his laptop, typing quickly. He searched the company records. Maria Ellis. Hired 8 years ago. Departed suddenly 5 years back. No next of kin. No emergency contact. Her profile photo stared back at him, quiet eyes, shy smile. And then he found something else. A scanned letter, labeled confidential, for Graham Lennox. Heart pounding, he clicked it open. Her handwriting was still the same. Slanted, neat, thoughtful. The letter explained everything. She had never meant to say anything. After the company holiday party, they'd shared a night together. A mistake, she called it, not because she didn't care, but because she'd known what kind of life he lived. She didn't want to be a burden or a disruption. When she learned she was pregnant, she left quietly determined to raise her children alone. But in the final paragraph, she wrote something that twisted in Graham's chest. "If anything ever happens to me," she wrote, "I've told them to find you. I didn't know what else to do. I always believed deep down that you'd care, even if you never knew." Graham leaned back in his chair and covered his face with his hands. He felt stunned, numb, but not broken. Not yet. Just lost in a wave of something bigger than words. Back in the office, Milo was quietly cleaning up the plates. "You don't have to do that," Graham said, stepping back in. Milo shrugged. "Mom always said to leave places better than you found them." Graham smiled faintly and knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "Can I ask one more thing?" he said softly. "When did your mom—" Milo's face fell slightly. "Last week, at the hospital. She said it wouldn't be long. She told us to be brave, that this was where we'd be okay." Graham nodded slowly. "You did the brave part. Now I'll take care of the rest." Arya had fallen asleep again. Graham picked up a blanket and covered her gently. Then he looked back at Milo. "You two can stay here for now, but we'll make a better plan soon, one that feels more like home." "Sound okay?" Milo nodded. "Okay." Graham didn't go to any meetings that day or answer any emails. He stayed in that room sitting with Milo while Arya napped, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. He was still stunned, still absorbing everything. But somewhere in his chest, something was already beginning to shift quietly, slowly, like the turn of a key inside a long-forgotten lock. He didn't know yet what kind of man he'd need to become, but he was starting to believe maybe he could. The office felt different now. It wasn't just that the room had 2 sleeping children on the couch, or that the air smelled faintly of syrup and cotton blankets. It was quieter somehow, like the building itself understood something sacred had arrived and decided to hush everything else. Graham sat at his desk, elbows on the polished wood, staring out the window with eyes that weren't really seeing anything. His mind was full heavy with memories and questions and a feeling he couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not yet, but something close. A soft sound broke the stillness. Little feet padding across the rug. Milo was up again, standing awkwardly near the edge of Graham's desk, hands clasped behind his back. "Is this where you work every day?" the boy asked. Graham blinked and nodded. "Yes." "Well, it used to feel that way. Now I'm not so sure." Milo's eyes moved slowly around the room. "It's really clean." "I like it neat," Graham said. Milo's gaze dropped to the floor. "Mom said you probably liked things perfect." Graham smiled sadly. "She said that, only once, when she was folding laundry. She looked tired, but she smiled when she said it." Something in Graham's chest cracked a little at that. The image of Maria folding laundry while whispering about him, someone she hadn't seen in years, was almost too much to sit with. and yet he sat with it anyway. Did she say anything else about me? He asked carefully. Milo hesitated. She said you were smart, busy, that you helped build big things. She wasn't wrong. Graham said more to himself than anyone else. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. Outside, the world continued as usual. Cars moved in and out of parking garages, people rushed to work with coffees and hand phones to their ears. His world until today had lived in that rhythm, but now it felt like he was on the other side of glass watching it all happen. He turned back to Milo. How long were you two alone? Milo shrugged. A couple nights. After the hospital, we stayed in the house, but people kept knocking. We got scared. So we left. You walked here. Milo nodded. It took a while. Arya said her feet hurt. Graham sat down heavily. You shouldn't have had to do that. It was what Mom told us. Come here, find the man with the quiet voice and the gray jackets. Graham let out a soft laugh. That sounds like me. Milo smiled a little. She said you'd know what to do. Graham wished that were true. Later that afternoon, he made a call. A discreet pediatrician named Dr. Lee, someone he'd used before for executive families, arrived within an hour. Older, kind-eyed, and unflustered by anything, he examined both children in the private lounge area, adjacent to Graham's office. They're healthy, Dr. Lee said, quietly afterward. A little underweight, mild dehydration, no signs of injury, but they've clearly been under stress. Graham nodded. Will you keep checking in on them? Of course. Weekly at least. Trauma runs deeper than the surface, but they've got each other. That helps. Graham walked Dr. Lee to the elevator, then returned to his office, where Milo was building a tower out of water bottles, and Arya was curled up again with her comic book, now held together by a rubber band. Hey, he said gently. How would you feel about staying somewhere a little cozier tonight? Milo looked up warily. Not with strangers. No, Graham said quickly. With me, somewhere quiet. With beds, real ones. Arya peeked over her book. Will there be blankets? Lots of them. They agreed. That evening, Graham drove them across the city to a private residence, usually reserved for visiting executives, a corporate apartment with a full kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a view of the skyline. He had the staff prepare it quietly, no questions asked. Soft sheets, teddy bears, small toothbrushes still in their wrappers. He didn't realize until they stepped inside how nervous he was. But Arya immediately ran to the window to look at the lights. It's like stars, she whispered. Milo walked the perimeter of the living room, like a security guard checking corners, peeking behind furniture. When he seemed satisfied, he turned to Graham and said, It's good. It was the highest praise Graham had ever received for an interior space. They ate simple food, mac and cheese from a box grapes juice boxes. Graham didn't have the heart to suggest vegetables. He sat with them at the dining table the first time in years he'd eaten off a plastic plate. They didn't talk much, but the silence didn't feel heavy. Afterward, Graham helped Arya brush her teeth, while Milo stubbornly insisted he could do his on his own. He let them pick their own beds, which turned into an argument, and then a compromise, both in the same room, sleeping side by side. He stood in the doorway for a long time after tucking them in. The moonlight fell across their faces. Arya was already asleep, her thumb pressed lightly to her cheek. Milo blinked slowly, eyes glassy. Are we going to have to leave soon? The boy asked. No, Graham said softly. This is your safe place now. Milo was quiet a moment. She would have liked that. You keeping us safe. Graham walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. I don't know if I'm doing it right. You are, Milo said. You didn't call anyone. That was good. Graham laughed quietly. You've got high standards. Milo smiled and rolled over. Graham stayed until their breathing steadied, until the room was filled with the gentle sound of sleep and moonlight and something else, something he hadn't known he needed. Peace. He stepped out to the living room and sat heavily on the couch. His phone buzzed with 3 missed calls and 17 emails. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't check a single one. Instead, he looked around the room at the abandoned juice box, the tiny sock under the coffee table, the faint trail of grape jelly on the side of the armrest. The mess was new, But it didn't feel wrong. It felt lived in, like something that might matter. And somewhere deep inside him, Graham knew this wasn't temporary. It couldn't be. The sun filtered in slowly through the high-rise windows, casting long, warm stripes across the floor. Graham Lennox stood barefoot in the hallway just outside the kids' room, holding two mismatched mugs of hot tea. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of Maria's letter replayed in his mind, her careful words, her quiet strength, her belief that he could be the one to keep her children safe. He hadn't earned that belief, not yet, but he wanted to. Inside the bedroom, Milo was still asleep, his legs twisted in the blankets, one hand gripping the edge of the pillow like it might float away. Arya, however, was awake. She was sitting on top of the covers, cross-legged, her comic book open in her lap, though she wasn't really reading. She glanced up at Graham and gave him a small smile, shy but genuine. "Morning," he whispered. "Morning." He stepped in slowly and handed her the second mug. It was mostly warm milk with a little honey, what Dr. Lee had suggested the night before. "Thank you," she said. He sat at the foot of the bed, careful not to disturb Milo. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "It's quieter here. Quieter's good." There was a short pause. Arya flipped the page of her comic, then looked up again. "Are you sad?" Graham was startled by the question, but he didn't dodge it. "A little, yeah." She tilted her head. "Is it about Mama?" He nodded. "I've been thinking about her a lot." Arya looked back down at the comic. "Me too." Later that morning, Graham slipped into his home office and sat down at the desk where he hadn't worked in days. He opened his laptop, not for emails, but for memory. He searched the company server again, this time more slowly. He pulled up Maria's old employee record, photo, resume, performance reviews. Everything said the same thing: competent, kind, steady. He remembered moments now, how she used to offer extra coverage when someone else called in sick, how she always brought a second cup of coffee to meetings, just in case someone forgot theirs. She was never loud, never demanding, but she had been constant, someone he could count on, someone he didn't think twice about. That realization ached. Then he found it an old video buried deep in the archive, a holiday office party from 7 years ago. The camera panned across groups of laughing employees, catching snippets of music and half-drunk toasts. And there she was, Maria, standing in the background, wearing a red sweater, smiling at something someone had said off camera. Then the camera turned just for a moment and caught him too. Graham laughing, a drink in his hand, leaning toward her. And just for a second, their eyes met. He stared at that frozen image on the screen for a long time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic, but it was real. That night, after the party, they'd stayed behind to clean up, talked longer than usual, shared stories they hadn't meant to share. One night, and then he never followed up. Never asked why she suddenly left 3 months later. He had been too focused on expansion, on product launches, on scaling a company. He assumed she'd moved on, found something better. He hadn't thought of her again until now, and all this time she'd been raising their children, alone. Graham closed the laptop gently, as if that would soften the truth. In the other room, the kids were watching cartoons. The sound of laughter, high and bright and imperfect, floated into the hallway. He leaned back in his chair and let the noise fill the quiet. He wasn't the man Maria remembered, but maybe he could become him now. That afternoon, Janine stopped by. She brought clothes, comfortable ones in small sizes, and a pair of tiny shoes Arya had once mentioned liking. She didn't ask any questions, just handed over the bags with a short smile. "You're doing okay," she said. "I don't know what I'm doing," Graham replied. "That counts." He introduced her briefly to the kids. Arya clung to his leg, unsure of the new person, while Milo offered a small wave from behind the couch. Janine smiled, knelt to their level, and said, "You two are safe. I promise." Later, as the kids tried on their new clothes in the spare bedroom, Graham stood in the kitchen wondering how much longer they could live like this, half and half out of the system. He made another call, this time to a woman named Tara Wells, a social worker he'd worked with on a corporate donation initiative a few years back. She was efficient, kind, and didn't pretend to be surprised when he explained what had happened. "I'll need to do a home visit," she said. talk to the kids, assess their needs. Of course. And Graham, this isn't just paperwork. If you want to stay in their lives, it's a real commitment. I know. He took a breath. I want to do this right. There was a pause, then a softer tone. Okay, I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. That night, Graham let the kids stay up a little longer than usual. They built a fort in the living room, using couch cushions and dining chairs. Arya declared it their spaceship, and Milo insisted he was the pilot. Graham was assigned the role of comms officer, which mostly involved pretending to press buttons and say things like starboard, secure captain. He laughed more than he had in years. They ate spaghetti on the floor, lit only by the spaceship's control panel, a desk lamp with a dish towel thrown over it. Graham didn't bother cleaning up right away. For once, the mess felt like it belonged. After bedtime, he sat on the balcony with a cup of tea he didn't drink and the city lights blinking below. He remembered the last thing Maria wrote in her letter, "I don't need forgiveness. I just want them to be safe. If they find you, it means I trusted you even when I wasn't sure you'd care. I hope that's still worth something." He read that line 3 times, then folded the letter and placed it inside a book near his bed. Tomorrow would bring questions, legal forms, evaluations, maybe even judgment. But tonight he had 2 kids under his roof, breathing steady safe in their beds. He didn't know if he was ready to be their father, but he was ready to stay, and that he hoped was enough to begin. The sun filtered in slowly through the high-rise windows, casting long, warm stripes across the floor. Graham Lennox stood barefoot in the hallway just outside the kids' room, holding 2 mismatched mugs of hot tea. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of Maria's letter replayed in his mind, her careful words, her quiet strength, her belief that he could be the one to keep her children safe. He hadn't earned that belief. Not yet. But he wanted to. Inside the bedroom, Milo was still asleep, his legs twisted in the blankets, one hand gripping the edge of the pillow like it might float away. Arya, however, was awake. She was sitting on top of the covers, cross-legged, her comic book open in her lap, though she wasn't really reading. She glanced up at Graham and gave him a small smile, shy but genuine. "Morning," he whispered. "Morning." He stepped in slowly and handed her the second mug. It was mostly warm milk, with a little honey, what Dr. Lee had suggested the night before. "Thank you," she said. He sat at the foot of the bed, careful not to disturb Milo. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "It's quieter here. Quieter's good." There was a short pause. Arya flipped the page of her comic, then looked up again. "Are you sad?" Graham was startled by the question, but he didn't dodge it. "A little. Yeah." She tilted her head. "Is it about Mama?" He nodded. "I've been thinking about her a lot." Arya looked back down at the comic. "Me too." Later that morning, Graham slipped into his home office and sat down at the desk where he hadn't worked in days. He opened his laptop not for emails, but for memory. He searched the company server again, this time more slowly. He pulled up Maria's old employee record. Photo. Resume. Performance reviews. Everything said the same thing, competent, kind, steady. He remembered moments now, how she used to offer extra coverage when someone else called in sick, how she always brought a second cup of coffee to meetings just in case someone forgot theirs. She was never loud, never demanding, but she had been constant, someone he could count on, someone he didn't think twice about. That realization ached. Then he found it an old video buried deep in the archive, a holiday office party from 7 years ago. The camera panned across groups of laughing employees, catching snippets of music and half-drunk toasts. And there she was, Maria, standing in the background, wearing a red sweater, smiling at something someone had said off camera. Then the camera turned just for a moment and caught him too, Graham laughing, a drink in his hand, leaning toward her. And just for a second, their eyes met. He stared at that frozen image on the screen for a long time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. But it was real. That night after the party, they'd stayed behind to clean up, talked longer than usual, shared stories they hadn't meant to share. One night. And then he never followed up, never asked why she suddenly left 3 months later. He had been too focused on expansion, on product launches, on scaling a company. He assumed she'd moved on, found something better. He hadn't thought of her again until now, and all this time she'd been raising their children, alone. Graham closed the laptop gently as if that would soften the truth. In the other room, the kids were watching cartoons. The sound of laughter, high and bright and imperfect, floated into the hallway. He leaned back in his chair and let the noise fill the quiet. He wasn't the man Maria remembered, but maybe he could become him now. That afternoon, Janine stopped by. She brought clothes, comfortable ones in small sizes, and a pair of tiny shoes Arya had once mentioned liking. She didn't ask any questions, just handed over the bags with a short smile. "You're doing okay," she said. "I don't know what I'm doing," Graham replied. "That counts." He introduced her briefly to the kids. Arya clung to his leg, unsure of the new person, while Milo offered a small wave from behind the couch. Janine smiled, knelt to their level and said, "You two are safe, I promise." Later, as the kids tried on their new clothes in the spare bedroom, Graham stood in the kitchen, wondering how much longer they could live like this, half and half out of the system. He made another call, this time to a woman named Tara Wells, a social worker he'd worked with on a corporate donation initiative a few years back. She was efficient, kind, and didn't pretend to be surprised when he explained what had happened. "I'll need to do a home visit," she said. "Talk to the kids. Assess their needs." "Of course. And Graham, this isn't just paperwork. If you want to stay in their lives, it's a real commitment. I know. Do you?" He took a breath. "I want to do this right." There was a pause, then a softer tone. "Okay, I'll be there tomorrow afternoon." That night, Graham let the kids stay up a little longer than usual. They built a fort in the living room using couch cushions and dining chairs. Arya declared it their spaceship, and Milo insisted he was the pilot. Graham was assigned the role of comms officer, which mostly involved pretending to press buttons and say things like, "Starboard, secure captain." He laughed more than he had in years. They ate spaghetti on the floor, lit only by the spaceship's control panel, a desk lamp with a dish towel thrown over it. Graham didn't bother cleaning up right away. For once, the mess felt like it belonged. After bedtime, he sat on the balcony with a cup of tea he didn't drink, and the city lights blinking below. He remembered the last thing Maria wrote in her letter, "I don't need forgiveness. I just want them to be safe. If they find you, it means I trusted you, even when I wasn't sure you'd care. I hope that's still worth something." He read that line 3 times, then folded the letter and placed it inside a book near his bed. Tomorrow would bring questions, legal forms, evaluations, maybe even judgment. But tonight he had 2 kids under his roof, breathing steady safe in their beds. He didn't know if he was ready to be their father, but he was ready to stay, and that he hoped was enough to begin. The next morning arrived quietly, slipping in through sheer curtains and landing softly on the apartment floor. Graham opened his eyes to the sound of little feet padding down the hallway and the hushed voices of 2 children trying not to wake him. "Do you think he's still asleep?" Arya whispered. "I think so," Milo replied. "His door's closed. Grown-ups don't get up early." Graham smiled to himself before sitting up. He stayed still for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. There was something about the apartment. Now it didn't echo like it used to. It didn't feel like a holding place between meetings or a hotel suite with expensive lamps and nothing personal. It felt full, lived in, human. He stepped out into the hallway barefoot, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and drawstring pants, comfort over appearance for once. In the kitchen, Arya was crouched in front of the cabinet with a box of cereal on the floor beside her. Milo was reaching up for the bowls. Graham paused in the doorway. "Starting breakfast without me?" The kids jumped. "You're awake," Milo said, then added sheepishly, "We were trying not to wake you. You did great," Graham said, walking over and crouching beside them. "I could help with that." He reached for the bowls, placing them gently on the counter, then took the milk from the fridge and poured it with a steadiness that surprised even him. They sat at the table, 3 bowls of cereal between them, and ate in near silence. Arya swung her feet under the chair. Milo stirred his spoon slowly. Halfway through the meal, Arya looked up and asked, "Are we still safe today?" Graham nodded. "Yes, and tomorrow, and the day after that." She smiled just slightly and went back to her cereal. After breakfast, they played in the living room, while Graham returned to his office to check emails. There were dozens of them, investor updates, project briefs, a few from Janine, with the subject line urgent-ish. But none of it felt urgent anymore. Not compared to the world on the other side of the hallway where two kids were turning couch cushions into a castle. At 10, the doorbell rang. Tara Wells stood in the hallway holding a canvas tote bag and a clipboard. She wore jeans, a navy cardigan, and a look that managed to be both professional and kind. "Hi, Graham." He opened the door wider. "Come in. They're just being kids." Tara stepped in and took a look around. The room was tidy but clearly lived in. Crayons on the coffee table, a paper crown on the armrest, a pair of little socks by the balcony door. She smiled. "This is a good start." Arya peeked out from behind the armchair, eyes wide. "Hi there," Tara said gently. "I'm a friend of Graham's. Can I sit with you for a bit?" Milo came out slowly eyeing the clipboard. "Are you here to take us away?" Tara knelt down. "No, sweetie. I'm here to make sure everything's okay, that you're happy and safe." Milo looked at Graham uncertain. Graham nodded. "She's here to help." Over the next hour, Tara moved quietly through the apartment, asking a few questions, watching how the kids interacted with Graham. She saw how Arya leaned her head against his side when she got sleepy. How Milo asked before taking out a new toy. How Graham without hesitation said sure and then helped him build it. In the kitchen, while the kids watched a cartoon, Tara turned to Graham. "You've done more in a week than some people do in years." He folded his arms. "I'm not trying to win a prize." "I know. That's what makes it work." She set down her clipboard. "I do need to talk to you about next steps." "Tell me." "There's a legal process, custody, paternity, home evaluation, counseling support for the kids. If you're serious about keeping them, we'll need to start that immediately." "I'm serious," Graham said without blinking. "You're ready for adoption," Graham exhaled. "Yes." Tara studied him for a long moment. "You're aware of what that means legally and emotionally. I wasn't a week ago. But I am now. Then I'll start the paperwork." She smiled again, genuine this time. "They're lucky to have you. I think I'm the lucky one." That evening, as the kids napped, Graham found himself in the hallway staring at the framed photo on the wall, a black and white picture of the original Lennox Tech team from the early days. He was in the center, clean-shaven, confident arms crossed. Maria had been just out of frame. He went to his room, opened his nightstand drawer, and pulled out her letter again. He read it once more, every line feeling heavier and deeper than the last. Then he opened a blank page in his notebook and started to write his own, not to the courts, not to the kids, to her. "Dear Maria, I didn't know what you were carrying. I didn't ask. I was too busy being important, building something that felt big, but was really very small. You trusted me with the one thing that meant more to you than anything in this world. And you did it without asking anything in return. I don't know how to be a dad, but I'm learning. From them. They're so much like you. Milo is brave but cautious. Arya is quiet but fierce in the way she looks out for him. They watch each other's backs like soldiers. And they've let me in. Somehow. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm not leaving. Thank you for believing I could do this. I won't let them go. Graham." He folded the page carefully and tucked it behind Maria's letter. That night after dinner, the kids curled up on either side of him on the couch. A cartoon was playing, but they were more focused on poking at his side and giggling than watching it. Arya yawned and leaned her head against his arm. Milo stretched out across his lap. "Can we stay here forever?" Arya asked drowsily. Graham didn't hesitate. "Yes. As long as you'll have me." They nodded as if it were the most natural answer in the world. Later, when the apartment was quiet and the only light came from the soft hallway lamp, Graham stood at the foot of their beds, just watching. Two sleeping children, one new life. He wasn't the man he used to be, and for the first time in a long time, he was okay with that. Graham had always been good at signing things. Contracts, merger agreements, NDAs, leases. He could breeze through a dozen legal pages while sipping coffee and thinking about the next product launch. But this morning, staring at the top sheet of a folder labeled Intent to Adopt, he felt something he never had before when holding a pen. Wait. Tara sat across from him at the dining table, her clipboard beside her, and a stack of forms ready to be completed. The kids were in the other room, coloring a giant paper robot Graham had picked up from the craft store. Milo kept calling it Captain Crunchbot and insisting it needed real buttons. "This is just the beginning of the process," Tara said, tapping the top page lightly. But it's the biggest step emotionally. Graham nodded slowly. I want to do it, all of it. Her expression softened. Good, because the court's going to ask a lot. There'll be home visits, psychological evaluations, interviews with the children. DNA results have confirmed paternity, which helps, but none of that replaces presence or care. He looked down at the form again. There in black ink was the blank line where he was meant to sign Graham Lennox, applicant for adoption. He took the pen and signed. Tara gave a small nod, tucked the paper into the folder, and smiled. Welcome to the messy, beautiful world of parenting. Graham laughed, but it came out tired. It already feels like I'm 5 years behind. Good parents always feel that way, she said, standing to leave. Just keep showing up. Later that afternoon, the suite was filled with the scent of spaghetti and the sound of laughter. Milo had discovered that dried noodles could make good swords, and Aria had taken to wearing one of Graham's old work ties, like a sash, declaring herself Princess of Noodles. Graham stood by the kitchen island, stirring the sauce and watching them from a distance. He still marveled at how quickly chaos had become comfort. Dinner was simple but full of warmth. They sat at the table, spaghetti on mismatched plates, and shared what they called the high and low, one good thing and one hard thing from the day. My high is, drawing Captain Crunchbot, Milo said proudly, and my low is that I didn't get to finish his laser arm yet. My high is the noodles, Arya added softly, and my low is my sock got wet. Graham smiled. My high is being with you two, and my low is I burned the garlic bread. Milo looked horrified. You burned the bread? Only a little. I trusted you, he said dramatically, then broke into a grin. After dinner, Graham read a story out loud, an old favorite from his childhood about a bear who couldn't find his way home. Arya leaned into him as he read, her thumb tucked under her chin. Milo sprawled across the couch, half listening, half dozing. The moment the book ended, Arya looked up at him and whispered, "What if they say no?" Graham paused. Who? The people. The judge. What if they don't let us stay? He felt her question like a stone. They'll ask questions, he said, but I'll be there for every answer. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Later that night, Milo had a nightmare. Graham woke to the sound of crying, soft at first, then louder. He hurried down the hallway and found Milo sitting up in bed, shaking his blanket bunched up around his legs. Hey, Graham said gently, sitting beside him. You're safe. Milo rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. There were people at the door. They wanted to take Arya. I told them no, but they didn't listen. No one's taking Arya, Graham said firmly. No one's taking either of you. Milo looked up, his eyes wet. You promise, I promise. He sat there until Milo drifted back to sleep, then stayed longer, just watching them both breathe. The next morning, Graham let the kids sleep in and made pancakes for the first time in years. They came out uneven, slightly burned on one side, but the kids didn't complain. In fact, Milo declared them kinda amazing. Janine stopped by around 10, dropping off some groceries and a few forms from the office. I told the board, you're on a temporary leave, she said quietly. They asked questions. I told them not to. Graham gave her a grateful look. You're the best, she smiled. You're different. Is that a good thing? It's the first time I've seen you wear slippers at 10 in the morning. So, yes. She crouched to say goodbye to the kids. Arya waved. Milo held out a drawing, a crayon version of their paper robot, and said, This is you. You're the one with the clipboard cannon. Janine laughed. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. After she left the suite, settled into a soft rhythm. Milo and Arya worked on puzzles, while Graham answered a few necessary emails. But even then, his mind wasn't on revenue charts or client pitches. It was on how many grapes Arya had eaten, whether Milo needed a haircut, whether he should sign up for parenting classes online. Later that day, while folding laundry, he found something small and unexpected, a yellow hair clip. It had been in Maria's box of things left behind at the office after she left. Graham had kept it, though he hadn't known why. He turned it over in his hands, then walked to the kids' room. Arya, he said softly, holding it out. This used to be your mom's. She took it carefully, reverently, and nodded. I remember it. Graham sat down on the floor beside her. She'd be proud of you. Arya looked up. Of you too, Graham hesitated. I hope so, he said. That evening, the three of them sat on the balcony, watching the sky turn from gold to deep blue. Milo had a blanket around his shoulders. Arya was curled in Graham's lap, the hair clip now tucked into her braid. Milo asked, "Can we still live here if you go back to work?" "I'm not going back yet," Graham said. "Not until things are settled." Because of us, he repeated. We're a team now. They stayed like that until the stars came out. Then Graham tucked them in and stood once again at their door watching them sleep. He still didn't feel like he had all the answers, but the questions didn't scare him anymore, because these nights, these promises, was what he was choosing over and over, and every day he was becoming someone he never knew he wanted to be. A dad, their dad, not just in name or on a line of paperwork, but in the quiet, unglamorous, beautiful way that really mattered. Rain tapped softly against the balcony glass that morning, a rhythmic hush that made the whole apartment feel still. Graham stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes slowly and far more carefully than the first time. The air was warm, filled with the scent of butter, and something sweeter. He couldn't name something that had nothing to do with food. Behind him, Milo was sitting cross-legged on the floor, trying to connect two mismatched Lego pieces with impressive stubbornness. Arya was drawing at the dining table, tongue slightly sticking out in concentration. She didn't speak much in the mornings, but she was always watching. Graham turned over the final pancake and set it on a plate. "Breakfast is ready, team." Milo jumped up instantly, already dragging a chair toward the table. Arya walked over more slowly, setting her drawing aside. Graham peeked at two stick figures holding a child's hand between them. One of the adults had glasses. The other had a very large tie. "Is this us?" he asked softly. Arya nodded, then added in her quiet voice, "It's for the fridge." He smiled, and with great ceremony, pinned it in the center with a blue magnet shaped like a star. They ate in the soft morning light, the rain still falling outside. No one was in a rush. Afterward, Graham packed their backpacks for the new day program Tara had arranged. It was small, trauma-informed, and built like a bridge for kids who had gone through sudden loss. The instructors were gentle, patient, and used to tears arriving without explanation. Still dropping them off wasn't easy. Milo walked in confidently, his hand firmly in Graham's, but Arya hesitated at the doorway. She tightened her grip around his wrist and leaned into his side. "Do I have to go?" she whispered. He knelt down. "Just for a little while. I'll come back after lunch, okay? You'll have fun. And they have paint. Real paint. Real paint. Big paper, too." She thought about that for a moment, then finally nodded. Before letting go of his arm, she whispered, "Don't forget to come back. Never." He stayed until he saw both of them find seats, and then walked back to the car, slower than usual, hands in his pockets, heart heavier than he expected. Back at the apartment, the quiet wasn't comforting. It felt too big, too hollow, so he worked. Not on company files, but on building something better for them. He called the leasing office about converting the guest suite into a long-term lease. He scheduled therapy appointments. He researched parenting support groups and emailed a private elementary school someone had recommended. By the time the clock hit noon, he'd drafted a grocery list, picked out kid-friendly recipes, and texted Janine to ask where to buy rain boots in small sizes. When he picked up Milo and Arya at one Nazos, both kids ran toward him without hesitation. "Look," Arya held up a painting, thick brush strokes of green and orange, and in the middle, 3 blobby people holding hands. She had drawn herself in yellow, Milo in blue, and Graham in purple, taller than the rest. "That's me," he said. "You're the tallest." He held her hand all the way to the car. That evening, they made grilled cheese together. Arya spread the butter carefully, eyes narrowed in focus. Milo dropped slices of cheddar on the floor at least 3 times and declared it a cheese emergency each time. At dinner, Milo asked, "What's your favorite thing to do?" Graham paused. "Used to be building things. Companies, mostly." "Is it still?" He looked at the two of them. "No, not anymore." "Then what is it?" "Right now, making you two laugh." Milo grinned and took a bite of his sandwich. "You're good at that." After they ate, Graham helped Arya wash her hair, kneeling beside the tub as she squirmed under the spray. He remembered how awkward he'd felt the first time, unsure of what shampoo to use or whether she liked water in her eyes. Now it felt familiar, almost easy. Milo burst in halfway through with a foam sword and declared the tub a pirate ship. Arya squealed as he launched rubber ducks across the bathroom. Graham rolled his eyes but smiled. That night, as he read them both a bedtime story, Arya suddenly reached for his hand. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked. "Of course." She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like. I try really hard, but it's fuzzy." Graham felt his chest tighten. "That's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to remember everything. You're allowed to forget a little." Arya nodded, her eyes starting to shimmer. "Do you miss her?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Every day, even though you didn't see her for a long time, even more because of that." She leaned into his side, her head resting against his chest. "She said you were kind, and you had a quiet voice, like a safe person." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She said that. Arya nodded. He stayed with them until both were asleep, then walked out into the living room and sat on the couch in the dark. He didn't check his phone, didn't turn on the news, didn't even look at the emails piling up on his tablet. He just sat breathing in the quiet of a life that was no longer his alone. The next morning, they were running late. Arya couldn't find her pink socks. Milo spilled juice on his pants and insisted he couldn't wear jeans that crunched when he sat. Graham burned the toast, then forgot to pack his own coffee. The apartment was loud and full of half-laughs and near tears and last-minute solutions. And yet, in the elevator holding Arya's hand and with Milo leaning on his side, Graham realized something strange. He wasn't frustrated. He was full of noise and small problems and sticky hands, full of questions and love and uneven schedules, full of moments that didn't seem important until they passed and left something behind: memories, laughter, trust. After drop-off, Graham went back upstairs, grabbed his notebook, and flipped to a blank page. He wrote a single sentence. "This is the life I never planned for, and exactly the one I want." Then he closed it and got to work, not on presentations, not on forecasts, but on being here fully. Because little moments were adding up, and they were building something real. It started with a question, quiet and unexpected, during a rainy Saturday afternoon. They had been building puzzles on the living room rug, a slow, rainy day sort of project with missing edge pieces and a dog in a hat that no one could quite align. Graham had just found a corner piece when Arya, without lifting her head, asked, "Can we visit her?" He didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. Milo looked up too, his expression more guarded. "You mean where she is now?" Arya nodded. Graham set the piece down and rested his hand on her back. "Yes, we can." He'd been thinking about it too, wondering when would be the right time if such a thing existed. But there was no schedule for grief, no checklist for when children should see a headstone with their mother's name carved in stone. That night, he emailed Tara. She replied almost immediately, "I think it's a good thing, as long as you're ready to walk through it with them." Graham didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he had to be. They went the next morning. It wasn't a fancy cemetery, just a quiet stretch of green near the edge of the city with trimmed grass and rows of modest stones that leaned slightly with time. The sky was pale blue clouds trailing thin across the horizon. Graham parked by a small maple tree and turned off the car. For a moment, no one moved. "You don't have to get out right away," he said gently. But Arya opened her door. Milo followed without a word. Graham had brought flowers, white lilies, simple, soft, respectful. He held them loosely as they walked along the path. The kids stayed close, one on either side of him. He could feel how small their hands were in his own. When they reached the grave, Graham stopped. The headstone was modest. Maria Ellis. A small carving of a butterfly in the upper corner. No long quote, just her name, the dates, and silence. Arya stepped forward first. She didn't speak. She knelt slowly and touched the stone. Milo stood behind her, shifting on his feet. "She was here the last time I saw her. I remember the window and the beeping. She didn't open her eyes that morning." Graham crouched down beside them and placed the lilies at the base of the grave. He swallowed the lump in his throat and said softly, "She was strong. She loved you both more than anything in the world, and she made sure you had a place to go. Arya's voice was barely a whisper. She said you'd come, that you wouldn't leave us. Graham looked at her stunned. She said you were a good man, just too busy to know it yet. He blinked hard against the tears rising in his eyes. I wish I'd been there sooner, he said. I wish I had known. Milo sat down beside him. You're here now. That's what she wanted, right? Graham nodded. Yeah, I think it is. They stayed for a long time, no one rushing, no one needing to speak. Arya traced the letters on the stone with her finger. Milo leaned against Graham's arm. The breeze carried the scent of grass and early spring. At one point, Arya asked, Do you think she sees us? I do, Graham said without hesitation. And I think she's proud of you, of both of you. Milo tilted his head. And of you? Graham gave a small, uncertain smile. Maybe. I hope so. She probably is, Milo said, even if you do burn pancakes. Graham laughed softly. Even then, especially then. On the way back to the car, the kids were quiet again, but not like before. It wasn't heavy or fearful. It felt thoughtful, like they had made peace with a part of the world they didn't understand. When they got home, Arya went to her room and curled up with her drawing pad. Milo curled next to Graham on the couch, head against his shoulder, no words needed. Later that evening, while the kids napped in their room, Graham found himself sitting alone in the living room, holding a framed photo of Maria. It was the only one he had pulled from the company's archive. She stood at the edge of a group photo, smiling gently, hands clasped in front of her. She looked like she didn't expect the photo to matter, but it did. It mattered more than he'd ever realized. He spoke out loud, even though no one was there to hear. I brought them. They were brave. You'd be proud. He wiped his thumb across the glass. I wish I'd seen you. I wish I'd known. But I promise you, I'm not letting them go. The next morning, the kids found him in the kitchen making toast and tea. Milo walked in first, rubbing his eyes. Can we go again someday to see her whenever you want? Graham said. Arya climbed onto a stool and pulled her cup close. I think she liked the flowers. I think so too. They sat in silence for a moment, eating breakfast with sleepy slowness. Then Arya said, I want to draw her, so I don't forget her face. Graham placed his hand gently on her back. That's a beautiful idea. I'll draw you too, she added, in purple, like always. He chuckled. Of course. What else would I be? That afternoon, they all went to the park. The sun had returned soft and low, stretching shadows across the grass. Graham watched from a bench as the kids ran toward the swings, shouting and laughing, their voices carried by the wind. A week ago, he might have sat with his phone in hand, answering emails, checking stocks. But today, he had nothing in his hands but time. And it was enough. When the kids finally ran back to him, breathless and flushed, Milo plopped down on the bench and leaned into his side. I'm glad we went, he said. Me too, Graham replied. Arya was still standing, swaying gently on her feet. She'd like that, we're okay. Graham looked at both of them, his arms stretched along the back of the bench, his chest full of something calm and strong. She'd like that, we're a family. That night, after stories and songs and whispered good nights, Graham sat at his desk and wrote another letter. Not for Maria this time, but for the kids. A letter he'd save, one they could read when they were older. He wrote about how they came into his life, how they changed it, how love didn't begin with a plan, but with a knock, a question, and a choice to stay. He ended the letter simply, You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't know what I was missing until I found you both asleep under my desk. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be yours. And I am. Always. Graham sealed the envelope and placed it in the back of his journal. Then he turned out, the light walked to their room, and looked in once more. Peace. For now, that was everything. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Not the usual kind of silence Graham was used to like his office, before sunrise, orderly and controlled, but the heavy kind. The kind that lingered in the air, settled in your chest, and made every footstep echo louder than it should. He stood outside the courtroom, holding Arya's hand, Milo leaning against his side. Tara stood beside them, clutching her folder of documents like armor. They had arrived early. Graham wanted time. Not to prepare, everything had already been filed, checked, confirmed, but to be still, to breathe, to let the kids feel safe. Arya wore a lavender dress with tiny white buttons. Milo had insisted on a red clip-on tie and kept checking to see if it was still straight. Graham had never worn a suit with more care. "You don't have to say anything," he told them softly. "The judge just wants to see that you're okay, that you're happy." "Will he ask if we love you?" Milo asked. Graham smiled. "Maybe." "Then I'll tell him yes," Milo said. "Easy." Arya didn't speak, but she squeezed his hand tighter. Inside the courtroom, everything was beige walls, floors, chairs. Even the judge's robe looked tired. The only warmth came from the soft afternoon light streaming through high windows. The judge was a man in his 60s with a thin mustache and a calm, unreadable face. He glanced through the papers before him, then looked up. "Mr. Lennox," he said, "I've reviewed the documentation. Your case is unusual, but not without precedent." Graham stood. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded toward the children. "And these are Milo and Arya." "Yes, sir. Children," the judge said gently. "How are you today?" Milo stood up shoulders square like a little soldier. "We're good. He made pancakes this morning." The courtroom chuckled softly. Arya peeked out from behind Graham. "He burns them. But we still eat them." The judge smiled. "That's often the best kind." Then his expression shifted more serious. "Do you feel safe with Mr. Lennox?" Milo spoke without hesitation. "He's our dad." The room went still. Arya whispered, "He's our home." Graham blinked quickly, looking down, trying to keep himself composed. The judge looked through one final page, then set it down and folded his hands. "Mr. Lennox, your commitment has been evident throughout this process. The court recognizes the biological connection, but more importantly, the emotional bond that's been built. These children have found security, stability, and affection in your care. I see no reason to delay this further." He picked up his pen, signed a document, and said simply, "Effective, today, Graham Lennox is the legal father of Milo and Arya Ellis." Graham didn't hear what came next. The gavel, the assistant shuffling papers, it all blurred. He dropped to one knee, and the kids threw their arms around him. Milo whispered in his ear, "Told you it'd be easy." Arya held on tighter than she ever had before. Tara stood quietly to the side, blinking back tears of her own. Back outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Brighter. Like the world had shifted just slightly into place. Graham took the kids out for ice cream double scoops with extra sprinkles. He let them choose whatever they wanted, no rules. They ate outside on a bench in the sun, and every so often Milo would glance up and say, "Dad," just to try it out. It made Graham's heart ache in the best possible way. When they got back home, the kids went straight for the fort they'd been building all week in the living room. Blankets draped over chairs, pillows stacked like castle walls, cardboard signs taped to the front. Today they added a new one. It read, "Dad's space, no dragons allowed, except nice ones." Graham laughed and crawled inside when invited. Arya handed him a paper crown made from a cereal box. Milo passed him a plush sword. They spent an hour in that tiny space arguing over who could be captain, who had to guard the snack stash, and who got to make the bedtime rules. Spoiler. Graham lost all 3 arguments. That evening, while the kids changed into pajamas, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror loosening his tie. He looked older than he remembered, but somehow lighter too, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. Janine called just as he was tucking the kids in. He answered on speakerphone. "How did it go?" she asked. "We're official," Graham said. "I knew it. They're lucky kids. I'm the lucky one." From the other side of the room, Milo called out, "Tell her I didn't cry." Janine laughed. Noted. After the call ended, Graham sat on the edge of the bed, while Arya burrowed under the blanket. "Will it be different now?" she asked. "What do you mean, now that it's real?" Graham smoothed back her hair. "It's been real, since the moment I found you." She nodded. "But now we don't have to worry." He kissed her forehead. "That's right, you're home," Milo mumbled from the other bed. "Even if you burn toast forever. Especially then," Graham said. That night he stayed up late, not because he had work, but because he didn't want to miss any of it. He wandered the apartment, turning off lights, folding stray blankets, picking up puzzle pieces from under the couch. He found Arya's drawing on the fridge, the one with the 3 stick figures. she had added a fourth, a small butterfly floating just above them. He didn't move it, just stared at it for a while. Then he made himself a cup of tea, sat down with his journal, and wrote just 5 words. This is what love builds, and for the first time in his life, that felt like the only legacy he ever needed. Saturday morning sun spilled across the floor as Graham poured orange juice into mismatched cups. Milo zoomed a toy car past his feet, while Aria added another crayon drawing to the fridge. Laughter filled the kitchen, loud, imperfect, real. When Milo asked, "What's for today?" Dad Graham didn't need to think. Whatever we want. We're home. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story moved, you please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And when you're ready, join us for the next story, where family begins in the most unexpected places.